Every time I meet other Vietnamese authors, I always like take them aside. I'm like, were you super scared that Vietnamese people were going to read your book? And they're like, yes. They're like the people I was scared of the most. I didn't know what the reaction would be. I was very concerned that people would read it and be like, the Vietnam War was 50 years ago. Get over it.
Welcome to the Empowered with Immigrant Parents podcast. My name is Allison Lee. I am your host, and I am here with an author today, Jamie Jo Hoang. And here on the Empowered with Immigrant Parents podcast, we empower you with stories, tips, and tools to help you reparent, reprogram your thoughts, your relationships, so that you can have the most important relationships the way that you want it to be, and just break generational patterns that no longer serve you. So, welcome, Jamie. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me. I loved getting to speak with you on the infatuation podcast, and
Yeah.
I love the work that you do. So I'm excited. I'm really, really excited to be here.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, thank you, Curtis. Shout out to Curtis on the Infatuation podcast. Check him out if you haven't heard. Yeah, we had an episode together talking about your new book, My Mother. Right, My Mother.
Yeah, my mother, the mermaid chaser.
I
Yeah.
was calling it My Mother, the Mermaid Killer earlier because I was mixing the two. But yeah, she's the author of My Mother, the Mermaid Chaser, and we talked about that on Curtis's podcast as well.
For people that don't know, the first book is called My Father, the Panda Killer. So Allison's not way off base when
Yeah.
she mixes them up.
Yeah, and as we were talking about earlier, I have a newborn, so my brain kind of, mixes up things a lot these days.
Yeah, but that's not too far off. It's
Yeah.
just a combo of the two books.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about you, and how you would describe what you do to your family.
So I am an author, although it's still really hard to kind of believe sometimes. Um, it's funny, I don't really talk, my parents know what I do. But prior to actually getting published, I worked in like every industry there is because I always had like a side job. So my parents really think I just have no uh drive and no career at all. And then once I started writing the books, they were like, "Oh, have you been doing this whole time?" Like, um, but it's been great because these books, my two young adult books, in particular, are conversation starters, and they've been conversation starters between my parents and I, which is really great. But also my cousins and a lot of people from my generation. So I'm hoping that it will continue with the next generation as like my generation starts to have kids and we start to be more open about talking about the history and where we came from and why we might have these tendencies that might seem odd to our
Yeah.
kids. So yeah, it's been a really rewarding journey. When I was writing My Father the Panda Killer, it was very isolating. I didn't really know what would happen with the book. Um, I really wrote it for myself. I wrote it as an exploration of all these things that I'd been feeling, particularly my desire to reach back and find a way to connect to Vietnamese culture in a way that felt authentic, but also taking into consideration that like I'm American born, and like how do we kind of capture the essence of Vietnameseness while we live in America, and just really build on, you know, finding ourselves and creating an identity that feels real to us.
Mm. So not only is these books that you've written conversation starters for others, but like it was also a conversation starter for your own family, even in just what your job, like what you did.
Yeah.
Yeah, but also,
Yeah.
all the family dynamics and history and stuff too.
Yeah, it was really cool because my mom, my parents can't read in English. And I tell people this all the time when I am at like speaking engagements that if they could read in English, I'm not sure I would have written these books, particularly the way that they are.
Mhm.
Um, and or have been like quite as honest, I think, in writing them. But so when the books came out, my mom like went to the library and she's like, I'm gonna learn how to read. And so she got all these kids books like Dr. Seuss and like was just trying to read very basic kids books in order to read my book. And it was really a struggle. But I thought it was really cool that she even like attempted, and
Yeah.
just was like, I'm just gonna start at kindergarten level and like let's see like where I can get. But yeah, it's cool just to kind of see like the effort. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I got chills when you said that because how sweet is that, right? Like that you wrote this book and here's your mom. Whether or not she reads it, the fact that she dedicated this time and had this effort, this thought of doing that, it's so beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not something you think about with immigrant parents too either,
Yeah.
right? Like you
Yeah.
would think they would just sort of be like, "Okay, well, good for you." Like and
Yeah.
not try to dive into it. So yeah, it was really sweet.
Yeah. And learning a new language is so hard. Like I'm trying to learn how to read Vietnamese and stuff better. Like even just read at all, actually, not better. And it's so hard. So
Yeah.
props to your
I
mom.
I buy children's books to read to my kid, and it's embarrassing that like I have to learn the book first and then I can read it to him, right? So I like read it 4 or 5 times and I can kind of get the essence because you sort of know it's a children's book, so you sort of know what the words might
Yeah.
possibly be, and you piece it together. But occasionally I'll call my parents and like we'll read it with them, and then they'll be like, "That is not how you say the word." I'm like, "Oh, well, that's helpful."
Yeah, that's so nice. I make up words sometimes if I don't know. I'm just like look at the picture and I describe around it because I can't read the words. I guess to just continue with the author, how you became an author line for a little bit. Like, a lot of kids, I imagine, maybe not a lot, maybe some kids imagine they want to be authors when they grow up. But for you, how did you know exactly, like, oh, like I am gonna write this book? Like, when was that moment for you?
Um, I don't think I had a singular moment.
Hmm.
I've always been like looking at the history of Vietnamese people in America. Like I had for like 2 decades, I would do a little bit of research, try to dive into like what happened with the Vietnam War, to try to figure out like my parents' experience in it. And then I would dip my toes in and then sort of back away from it and dip my toes in and back away from it. And, you know, a lot of those because it's very hard to read, but also I also can't read in Vietnamese. So I always felt like I was missing half the story.
Mm.
Um, and but I knew that like if there was going to be one singular story I tell in the entirety of my life, I wanted it to be um, a story about like my family in its totality, not just about the war itself, but about like what it's like to grow up with parents who hold all of this trauma and how we progress forward, how we move past it, and not just by ignoring it, which is what I think my parents' generation really wanted to do, or at least I shouldn't say all of them, but my parents in particular, they never talked about it. And I don't think it was because they didn't want to tell their stories, but just because they were so busy, like building a life, and that takes a lot of energy. And these conversations are hard and taxing
Yeah.
mentally, so there just wasn't the bandwidth for it. But I feel very fortunate in like that for our generation, we are not living in a time of war. I mean, there's war all around the world, but for us specifically, like we have the privilege of having the time and space to reflect on what happened and how we got here. And that is really what propelled me to start writing the story. And at first I had written like I wrote the father story and Jane's story separately as two sort of
Yes.
separate books. And at some point I realized like, oh, actually it's the same book. So the combining of them was the start of like a true understanding. Like, okay, I think I have something here that I want to turn into a story. And yeah, it was really like an exploration for myself. And the outward reward part of it is just in getting to see other people take something from it too, and see their parents in a different light, and
Mhm.
also think about their relationship with their parents and why, you know, in our like a sort of American ideology, how we might have misconstrued our parents' reactions to things because they don't do things the American way, right? And we didn't have an understanding of what the Vietnamese way was because we just didn't know.
Yeah.
Um, so that's been really cool.
Yeah. And I think what I'm hearing is like the pull back to it, right? Like maybe like you need some space from it, but then the desire to always get back to what you were doing is maybe some of the clues that maybe our listeners can kind of tap into. If we keep getting pulled back into something, maybe there's something there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think also like, you know, I our relationship with our parents can be really complicated at times. And I think that we often don't give ourselves um, credit or space to reflect and think about, like, okay, how do I really, like, just by myself with no outside influences or like not thinking about my parents' feelings, how do I feel about something? Because at some point, like, we as adults, we have to figure out the the person we want to be, and we have to figure out the boundaries that um are going to like sort of be the guiding bounds of our lives, right? And you can't do that if you are constantly sort of being sucked into the like
Mhm.
trauma that your parents had before. So taking some time to like maybe just like I need some space to just really figure out like how I personally want to live my life, how I want to raise the next generation, what things we're going to do differently, and not like as a punishment to you, but just because progression requires us to really think about how we want to move forward, and sometimes that like that tie back can really hold us back from moving forward. So I think like what I'm kind of saying is if you have a strained relationship with your parents and you take some time to like not speak for a bit, don't be so hard on yourself for taking that time, because I think it's a good it's a good thing. Like it can be really hard and it's a really hard step to take. But at the end, if you really take that time to self reflect, you can get something out of it that then benefits both of you, right? Like, I think for me, I just made a lot of assumptions about what my parents thought or what they did. And there's a lot of like, oh, well, that's just how they are, right? That phrase, that's just how they are. But if you take a step away, you recognize like you actually get to decide how things are going to be. And then once you figure out what that is, then you can set these parameters. And so for me, it was like, I don't want to not talk about it anymore.
Mhm.
So I wrote these books. We are now going to talk about it. And it's been really interesting and very cool to actually hear the stories. A lot of the things I just didn't know. And it gives me such a greater appreciation for the Vietnamese people, Vietnamese culture. And in a way, like it's helping me build this like pride in being Vietnamese that I didn't have before.
Yeah. Oh, so many great things. I don't even know where to start. But the first thing that I was thinking about as you were talking is the boundaries, right? I think for a lot of adults with immigrant parents, boundaries are hard because there may have been a lack of boundaries growing up. Not again, always maliciously, just because there just may be a need, right? Growing up, like for me, being born here as well, I had to help my parents a lot with different things. And it wasn't like they were like, oh, let's have Allison do all the work. Like, it was just a necessity because I knew how to read English and all of that. Um, and so, yeah, the lack of boundaries growing up can really set us up to not have the practice of setting boundaries, and we view them as such negative things because like even for me when I started setting boundaries I was like, oh my gosh, my family thinks I'm abandoning them, they think I don't love them, and like all these negative thoughts, right? Which are not true. The boundaries actually strengthen relationships because without them we burn out, we start getting resentful, we start, yeah, actually cutting ties with the very people that we don't want to cut ties with because we think that's the only way. But boundaries are so
Yeah.
helpful. And I love how you described, that space and just being kind to yourself for it.
Yeah, I think it's exhausting to not have boundaries. And that resentment that you're talking about is so real. Like, and it's heavy and that it's like a mountain, right? It starts as like an anthill and it just grows and grows. And before you know it, you can't even see over it anymore. And so I think for a lot of us, like maybe we view having boundaries as like a weakness, like, oh, I can't handle it, so I need to
Hmm.
step away. But that's not it at all. Like,
Yeah.
I think it's the opposite. It's like what you're saying, like if you have those boundaries, then like it gives you the energy and the ability to like handle those situations and in a like graceful way too, because you're not exhausted, right? I mean, like you
Hmm.
have a young kid, I have a young kid. Like I always think about how my parents were really hard on us and they yelled at us a lot. They were physically abusive, and but I think about how much stress and pressure they were under to thrive and survive in a country that they did not know the language to and like were very new in. And I think, yeah, I have like a tenth of that pressure and I snap at my kids sometimes, right? So when I do, it's very clear to me like, yeah, when you're stressed out or when you have like really primal things that you're having to fight for, your kindness level is your kindness threshold is a lot lower.
Hmm.
Um, so, like, seeing that also allows us to give grace when we think about the way our parents treated us versus how we wanted to be treated and how we like treat our kids now. It's different.
Yeah. Yeah, so that recognition of and it's called this Maslow hierarchy of needs, where if our survival, our basic necessities aren't met, it's really hard to think about like, oh, who am I? What's my identity? How do I want to show up in this world? Like, on a very more high level, right? When if we're just struggling to figure out what this letter says or how we're going to get food on the table or just adjusting to, yeah, different cultures and all of that. And yeah, on top of that, having children who are, they also need a lot of things. So it's a lot.
But what I think is so great is we have that space now.
Hmm.
And my generation, I think that's our job, right? Like, I think about every generation has its task. And our parents' generation, it was survival. And I think ours is understanding and then progression, right? And progression does not mean just taking everything that comes at us and then, you know, sucking it up, right? Like, I think it's about really unboxing it and trying to figure out, like, okay, well, why is that? And is there a way that we can, like, not absorb it so that we then carry it forward, right? How do
Hmm.
we dismantle it so that it doesn't follow us?
Yeah.
And I think that that's really the breaking of like generational cycles of trauma, right? And I honestly feel very proud of the second gen Vietnamese people that I know because almost none of us have carried with us the level of trauma that I think we could have that what like from what like is passed down, you know, from one generation that suffered tremendously to the next. And so, you know, I look around at all of my friends and, you know, the Vietnamese people, just second gen Vietnamese people in general. And I think like, yeah, we are doing so great. Like we should, you know, pat ourselves on the back.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like starting with that decision that you're talking about, right? Like even with you writing these books, it's this decision that I am going to talk about it. I want to do this for me. And now everyone's talking about it. So then like you're inadvertently this ripple effect like helped some healing for a lot of people. But it really started with a decision with yourself that you felt good about.
Yeah, I mean, I was scared. Like, um, I every time I meet other Vietnamese authors, I always like take them aside. I'm like, "Were you super scared that Vietnamese people were going to read your book?" And they're like, "Yes." They're like the people I was scared of the most. Um, you know, I didn't know what the reaction would be. I was very concerned that people would read it and be like, we, you know, the Vietnam War was 50 years ago. Get over it. Like we've moved on. You know, we're thriving. We are building businesses, and all of that is 100% true. Um, but I think it's important to um, unbox these things and dismantle them because I think if you leave them in a box in the corner, that box is still there and who knows who's going to open it. And then suddenly this like box that you just wanted to push aside is like just it cannot be closed again. And you're having to deal with it maybe at not an optimal time or, you know, so I feel like we just can't like pretend it's not there. I think really facing it is important. Um, and so even though some of the topics are really hard in the books, I think it's necessary. And my publisher, I remember like being asked about, you know, how much of this do you really want to put in? And for me, I was like, I I understand that reading about trauma can be really triggering for some people, and there are trigger warnings at the beginning of the book. Um, but every reader is different, right? And I think there are some readers who really have to see um, the full extent of it to recognize it when it's happening to them. And sometimes when you know, I mean, I've heard this like many times somewhere, and so I don't know where it comes from exactly, but the idea that like when you look at someone else who's suffering, and even though they're experiencing something very similar to you, you're like, oh no, that's not me. Like I'm not abused. I did not, like that's you know, or that's so much worse, right? Um, but sometimes it is that bad, and um, I think for some of us, like seeing it full frontal, like um, not hidden behind like a veil of, um, I don't know, flowers, I guess, if you will, like just the kind of raw honesty. It's helpful because it helps us recognize, like, you know, that really wasn't okay, and like that's not something I don't have to carry resentment about it. But I can recognize it and then choose not to do it, right? And I think that that's really important.
Yeah. Yeah, so even that just that awareness is really important, right? Whether or not we actually get triggered by the box, open up the box and like dismantle it right away, like that recognition of just the fact that it's there can also be very important. And like you said, depending on the person, maybe they need different levels of how they experience it before addressing the box, right? And this book does that, right? And I think even for me, when I was reading them, I got to imagine like, well, make up stories about how my parents might have experience something based on what I read so that I felt like I had a closure in some way, even though I never get to ask them about it because, and I think you said this on Curtis's podcast where it's not our story to know or something like that. And I was like, oh my God, that is so true. Like, why do I want to like press and press and press so that I can feel better, so that I can know, which is great for me, but it may not be what they want or what they need, and just honoring that a little bit. So then I get to just read this book and make up my own stories. I can ask them if I want to, but if they don't share, I feel okay about it. And that's kind of what these books did for me at this period of time. So yeah, I really liked that.
I one of the greatest experiences I had when I was on like my sort of book tour for Panda Killer was I was at the Texas Book Festival, and there was a kid in the audience who was like with his parents, and I wasn't really sure like what the kid was taking in, but I say kid, he was a teenager. But at the end of it, he stood up and he was like, my parents are from Guatemala, and he's like, do you ever feel like you gaslight yourself in saying that like, oh, their experiences were so much tougher than mine, so like my experiences don't matter, or I shouldn't like take into consideration how hard my life is, or the things that I'm going through. And I was like, yes, 100% yes, right? Absolutely. Like that's what happens to us is we're like, well, we can't complain about what we're going through when what they went through is so much worse. But that's not, I don't think that's like the right comparator, right? Like our lives are different and we're all progressing towards something better. So your parents progress towards something better in the way that they know how, and you also need to validate like your experiences so that you can do that progress forward in the way that makes sense for you. And I think what I found so interesting about my conversation with him was that I think for him, being able to read a story that's like about a Vietnamese person, not specifically a Guatemalan immigrant, it allows you to sort of like step out of your own traumas for a minute, because you're reading someone else's stories. But immigration is there are a lot of common themes in like first and second gen stories, and I think there's a lot that you can relate to, and there's an openness that you have when it's not that when it doesn't feel so directly tied to you.
Mhm.
So I think, when I read stories about migrants coming from Mexico, like I'm from California, so a lot of my friends are Mexican, like the journey that you hear about is harrowing and traumatic and, you know, so difficult. And I empathized with that, not knowing really anything about the plight. And I think that it comes full circle, right? Because when they read about Vietnamese stories and they understand the plight of immigrants, like then suddenly we all understand as immigrants, like the sort of broader, you know, expanse of all of us immigrants, like we share in a struggle that is very universal to immigrants. And so these stories are not just meant for like, hey, if you're Vietnamese, you should read this story. It's like, no, anyone who's had an immigrant experience, just like, your podcast, anyone who's had an immigrant experience, we're all going through very similar things. And talking about them is very helpful. But also hearing about cultural differences, oftentimes they're very similar. And it's like something you can like laugh about if you're not crying about it, together. And I think that it makes us really empathetic to each other, which then binds us together. And it helps build community, which is really what we want in like America, right?
Mhm. Yeah, especially when these experiences can feel so isolating, especially for a long time as we were growing up, I would imagine people didn't talk about it as much. There was no space, there was no um like medium for it as much, right? As compared to now. So people can feel very isolated. And I think a lot of like the people I work with too think that they're the only ones when yes, like you have your own unique experience, but like you're saying, this human immigrant experience and whatnot, it's like all shared. Like we all feel these feelings to some extent in some way, and they're all valid, right? Our parents' experiences are valid, ours are valid as well. They're just different. Yeah.
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 Yeah. And the more that we absorb um different stories, different like I think the more you take, right? So in any given book, there might be like certain topics that you really gravitate to and other things that like are not so close. But with every additional book that you find, there's like a little bit more that you can pull from it. And that's sort of like creating your own unique quilt of stories, right? Where you pull a little bit from this book and a little bit from that book and then you create the like patterns that you want to make to build this like blanket, which would be very comfortable for yourself because you made it yourself and it's made of all the things that fit you personally, and it's not going to look like anybody else's. It's going to be unique and like beautiful in its own way. And I think that that's what we should strive for, is like this sort of individual identity using collective stories.
Mhm. So as you write these stories, as you've written these stories, and as you continue to write, what are ways that you metaphorically take care of the box, address the box, or leave the box alone and take care of yourself as you're going through this process?
Hey, if you found this episode or any other episodes helpful, insightful, relatable so far, get on my email list as well. This is where you would get actionable tips, relatable tools, and it's just a space where you can feel connected and have the support and tools that may be beneficial for you as you're embracing how to unlock your fullest potential as an adult with immigrant parents. So go to heyalisonlee.com/email to get on the email list, and I will talk to you there. The link will be in the show notes as well. All right, back to the episode.
I drink a lot of tea. I wish I could meditate, but really I find soothing sounds and I just kind of lay there. I don't think it's
That's
meditation in its
meditating.
true
Yeah.
sense.
Well,
um, but I also like I found this really indulgent for the longest time, so I couldn't get myself to do it. But then my best friend just kept sending me gift cards, and so I get massages like once a month. Um, and it's funny because the first couple times I went, the masseuse was like, "Your shoulders are so tense," and I was like, "Yeah, I've heard that." Like I've been to a chiropractor where he's like, "Geez, I've had football players that are not as tense as you. Like I can't even crack your back," and I was like, I don't know what to tell you. So like it made me realize like I carry so much tension there and I have for such a long time. And um though I, grew up feeling like it's really indulgent, I realized like that is part of self-care, right? Getting my shoulders to just relax and having someone massage them so that they can relax
yeah.
is important. So that's a ritual, but mostly it's conversations. I'm someone who likes to really to talk and I have a lot of friends, and so I will just like pick up my phone and put in earbuds and call a friend and talk for 3 hours while I'm walking. I live near like a big walking trail, and just like walking and talking to people and just like connecting, that for me is like self-care. It's feeling connected, especially because I work alone most of the time.
Mm.
Like that connection to other people is really vital for me. Um, yeah, and I think also just like whenever I do something or say something um, wrong, quote unquote, I think like, hey, you are a work in progress. You're not going to be perfect. You're not going to get it right every time. It's fine. Like all you have to do is acknowledge it and then, do your best to move on from it. And I think that's really helpful in the writing also because, you know, oftentimes you wonder like is this the right is this like the right theme that I'm going for? Is am I expressing it in the right way? Are people going to um understand it, or are they going to hate it? Are they going to, and I think that like not knowing and giving yourself grace and being able to say like I'm still learning about a lot of these things too, um is both freeing and empowering. Nobody knows everything.
Yeah.
And I think the notion that people do is a fallacy, and I think we should appreciate people's flaws, including our own. So
Hmm.
just being really gentle with ourselves, which is a hard thing to do when you grow up, I think, in a family where like perfection is not appreciated, but like expected.
Hmm. Your self-care is great. I mean, you touch on all the senses, right? There's the touch, taste, maybe not, we didn't talk about smell, but you were walking, you're talking to your friend, you're doing all the
Yeah.
different senses to have a mixture of self-care, which is what we really all should do. And I hope the listeners like take some of that, right? And just have this in their little toolbox of different things that they can do.
I do have a diffuser for the smell part.
Mm, yeah, there you go.
Eucalyptus. Eucalyptus
Hmm.
is my jam. Could I just like sometimes I have like a eucalyptus like lotion too. I find it just very stress relieving. Like you
Mm,
if you just having it around.
yeah.
So
I think
yeah.
that's the smell. You know, at like Bed Bath and Beyond or whatever, they used, or no, that's not it. Bath and Body Works. They used to
Yes,
have those
the stress relief
stress
candle.
relief. That's eucalyptus, right?
Yeah, but I
Yeah.
can't find it. I think they stopped making it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they used to have one that was like so good. I mean, very expensive, like $30 for a candle. But if it relieves stress, it's kind of
Yeah.
worth it. But yeah, I think they like changed their like I don't know, scent, and it's not the same,
Oh,
or
it's
it's
not
not
available.
there anymore.
Oh, yeah.
Such a
But that's
bummer.
great. Yeah. So the self-care stuff is always good when we tap into different senses, and you seem to have great options of what you can do. So. And you know what you were talking about with that perfection too, I can imagine, especially writing, right? Because writing you can always change it. Like, so
Mhm.
I can imagine that there's a cycle of always just potentially going back and trying to make it quote unquote perfect, which I mean, that's a never ending cycle, right? So how do you know when you feel good about something to like, that's good and let it go? Like, how do we let go?
You know what's funny is I have a tendency to like make my characters flawless, which is so unrealistic, right? And I have to go in and build in flaws because like I am someone who has always like I'm a people pleaser. I've always wanted to be liked. And so then by extension my characters are like that too, right? They never do anything wrong, and I'm like that's not real. So I think, you know, for me like when usually like every character, even the minor ones, are like a small extension of like either some feeling I've had or like something that sparked like that characteristic. So they're all like mini extensions of like me either at this point in time or like a different point in time. And generally I know that a story is ready when I feel like that character is no longer an extension of me, but like a different part, like another person. Like I feel like I can sit at a coffee table and sit down across from them and have a conversation, and they would be a totally different person than I am. So I usually write a draft until I sort of feel like they are their own being. Yeah.
Wow, that's great. That's really cool. Like a
Yeah.
cool visual and a very distinct way to notice like how you feel about them, like your characters. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you like do enough work to make this a story that is not just you, right? And also a person who is flawed and varied, and you know, did you dig deep enough so that they are multi-layered, so
Mhm.
that if they knock into something, what kind of reaction they're going to have. Are they the kind of person that is going to get really mad at themselves? And then, or are they the kind of person that gets super embarrassed and falls, doesn't like turns away and runs away? Like, are they a fight or flight kind of person? Are they feisty? Like those kinds of things where you're like, I know what I would do, but the character that I've built would do something different.
Yeah,
Um, yeah.
that's cool. So, with My Mother, the Mermaid Chaser, what do you hope listeners, when they read this, is there a perspective you want them to go into it with, or what do you hope they kind of carry with them as they read it or take away?
One of the things that really struck me about war was how little women are considered, um, especially when we carry such a huge burden, when it comes to like the emotional toll, but also like when men are off fighting, women are doing everything else, right? And I think I really wanted to highlight um, the female struggle and to include mental health, right? How that amount of trauma and loss affects people. And like, I think we are really judgmental, particularly when it comes to women, about what a mother is supposed to be, how a mother is supposed to act. And we don't take into consideration that, women have, we've been built to suffer and we have suffered and we suffer through a lot, but we are allowed to do things in a way that does not make sense to you. And I think um, one of the things I was really afraid about when I was publishing the book, that was that people were going to feel like no mother would ever leave their children. And while I love like the reasoning behind that, and I think of course like yeah, no mother would leave their child. Like a mother loves their children, absolutely. Let's think about the circumstances around which, like, why a mother might do that,
Mhm.
and let's like approach it with empathy and understanding of like, maybe asking instead of being judgmental about their choices, maybe ask like what might drive someone to do that. And also consider that her choice, while it might seem selfish to you, is a sacrifice she makes for the sake of her kids too, right? It's like, if I know that my mental health is going to affect my kids and that I'm going to do things that might harm them, like that's a choice that, you make that is incredibly difficult. That's not an easy choice anybody makes, right?
Mhm.
So I think meeting our, you know, our female character, the main character, with some grace and compassion, um, is really what I hope readers take away. I hope they sort of question the dynamics, and the societal pressures we put on women, women refugees in particular, and really consider the emotional burden and loss that they suffer as they get here.
Yeah. And I think that that's such a great practice too. If you or listeners or if we have a hard time doing that to ourselves, right? With being curious, not being judgmental, like not really looking at the bigger picture as to why we do things, it could be a great practice to do it to a book, to a character, to other people in our lives. So we have that practice and build up that muscle. So then, that parallel process of being eventually being able to do that to ourselves too, more, then, can be kind of something we can master or have more practice at that helps us feel good and other people feel good and just create more understanding for everyone altogether. So I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I I feel like people don't talk about how much easier it is to do things for other people. And you're right,
Mhm.
like that practice of like doing it like for a character, and then circling back to do it for yourself. Like the circling back, I think, is probably the hardest step, right? To make that U-turn and then give yourself that same grace and compassion is a hard thing to do. And I hope that like people listening will internalize that and then remember to do it, right? Because it's easy to do it for others and it's really hard to remember to do it for yourself.
Hmm. Yeah, and maybe we could even practice it with our parents after reading the book.
Yeah.
Practice our
Yeah.
parents, ourselves, our family, whatever we can.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Our
it's a lot to ask.
siblings, like,
Hmm.
I the thing I love about the two books is like the sibling relationship. Because I have four siblings and my siblings are, we're all really close. And I feel like they are the reason why I am the way I am today, and I feel like having siblings where you feel like they will like catch you if you fall, um, and be there for you if you really need it. Like that's really helpful. And I don't think we have enough stories about the sibling dynamic and how helpful siblings can be for each other, like emotionally, especially when you grow up in a household that is like traumatic or you go through traumatic things together. Like that bond is forever. And I think I really appreciate my siblings, and so I wanted to tell a story that like included how they think differently because we all, we do,
Hmm.
but also like that something that showed that like, no matter how different they are, like their love for each other is always going to bring them back to each other. And yeah, like I love the idea that like they are the individual people, but they don't want to lose each other, but they're also finding their own way, right? So Paul is going to do things that maybe his sister Jane is not happy with, and as his own person, he has to make those choices, right? He has to
Hmm.
decide for himself like what he's going to what choices he's going to make in spite of what he knows his sister wants.
Yeah.
Um yeah.
Yeah, that's a big theme for today, huh? Like just having that decision, making a choice, and then having stories, people in our lives, community to help us make a decision that really suits us, and having that reflection and having that self-care, all of that to make a decision on what we want. And yeah, hopefully this book helps people with seeing other options, seeing different stories, and deciding for themselves how they want to proceed.
Yeah, and then finding a way to like feel good about that
Hmm.
choice, right? So that you can lean into it and really
Yeah.
ultimately find peace with like the choices you make and where your life is going and yeah.
Yeah, and it may not always feel good, right? There's going to be like up and downs, but
Yeah.
overall, does it feel good? And is it leading us to something that we feel good about? Is so important to keep in mind, right? That bigger picture. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much,
Yeah.
Jamie, for being here. I loved our conversation. Where can people find you? Where can they find these books? Like, how can people be in touch with you?
The books are available. They should be available anywhere you buy books. So, Amazon, Target, Barnes and Nobles, your local indie bookstores, will they generally, if they don't carry it, a lot of them do, which is amazing, and I love the indie bookstores. But if they don't carry it in the store, they can generally order it pretty quickly. Um, I am on Instagram mostly at Hey Jamie Reads. I have a website also, heyjamie.com. Um, I refuse to be on TikTok, even though I have an account, but I don't use it and I'm terrible at it. So don't go there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Also,
And
just
is
my email's on my website. So you can reach me there. And I'm always open for school visits, book clubs, anything like that. I love talking about the books and hearing about what other people pull from the books because oftentimes it's not the same things like that I gravitate to the most. Like the parts that people find really emotional are not necessarily the same parts I found really emotional to write. So that's always really interesting for me.
yeah, yeah, you never know what people pull away from it or what sparks different things for people. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
awesome. Cool. And if no one's read any of your books, which I hope that's not true, but if they had to pick one to start, like what would you recommend?
I would say that if you are someone who's really sensitive, and uh, emotionally open, um, I would start with My Mother, the Mermaid Chaser, because it's a little bit lighter, um, and I think it's a more um, contemporary story in a way. It takes place a little bit later, but it's also just like it's more of like a flower in bloom. Whereas My Father the Panda Killer is a little bit darker and it's really like the lotus that's like in the mud. So it's pretty grimy at parts. But I would read so I would start with Mermaid Chaser if like you might think like some things are kind of hard to stomach, I guess. Um, but if you are someone who like likes to read horror and thriller books and are not like super triggered by uh dark themes, then My Mother the Mermaid Chaser, or I'm sorry, My Father the Panda Killer is going to be probably a little more gripping. Um, yeah.
Yeah.
As far as like a blurb goes, I would say both of the books are really about one family struggling to um, move past the Vietnam War in a way that is um, building understanding about what happened amidst these generational gaps where conversation and information is not necessarily free flowing. So it's about a brother and a sister, each in their own way, figuring out their opposite, like their parents' stories. So the sister is exploring the dad's story, and the brother explores the mother's story, and they're unique and different. Their voices are very different, but the two stories really kind of speak to each other in a way that I think siblings do.
Thank you for that. Yeah, and I loved both books. I read both of them. I did actually start with my Mother, the Mermaid Catcher, but for the podcast first. So, but actually, I think it warmed me up to the Panda Killer book. So I think what you suggested was really helpful for me, at least.
Yeah.
And like I said, I loved both books, and I can't wait for our listeners to listen to it and for more books to come from you. No
Thank
pressure, but
you.
yeah,
Thanks. I
yeah.
mean, I've you had just had a newborn at that time too,
Mhm.
so yeah, definitely Mermaid Chaser.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, well, thank you, Jamie, so much for being here. For our listeners, check out Jamie at Hey Jamie Reads on Instagram and check out her books. And we'll talk to you soon. Thank you, Jamie, for being
Thank
here.
you. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Hey, thanks for listening to the show. I appreciate you being here. Just as a reminder, all information on this is intended to be informational and educational only. Although I am a licensed therapist, I am not your therapist. If you are looking for any medical or mental health services, please reach out to providers local to your area and seek out information that is specific for you. This information is not intended to replace any medical or mental health services that you may benefit from. And I hope that you enjoyed the information that was provided on the show today, and I'll see you on the next episode.